The first brushstroke of beige paint hit my satellite dish at 8:14 a.m. sharp, right when the morning news anchor was mid-sentence about record heat warnings. By the third splatter, the signal pixelated, froze, and died completely. I stood in my driveway holding my coffee, watching as Karen Blackwell, our HOA president and self-appointed community aesthetic coordinator, balanced on a stepladder in my yard, slapping paint across the metal like she was restoring the Sistine Chapel. When I asked what on earth she was doing, she looked down over her oversized sunglasses and said, "Neutral tones only. The dish violates Section 7C. That's how the battle started. A single dish, one HOA president with a paintbrush, and a 3-day internet blackout that would make her regret ever touching it. It all began 2 weeks before that morning, when I had the dish installed. My property sits on the edge of Willow Creek Estates, the last house before the tree line starts. The cable infrastructure here is older than dial-up, and the only way to get a stable connection for my remote engineering job was satellite. I filed a request to the HOA, included the FCC exemption clause that said they couldn't deny me, and even submitted mock-ups showing the dish facing away from the street. Karen, of course, denied it anyway. "We want harmony, not hardware," she wrote in an email decorated with Comic Sans and digital flowers. I installed it anyway. Legally, I was in the clear. Morally, in her eyes, I had just spit on the sacred scroll of the neighborhood charter. For the first few days, she limited herself to passive aggression. She sent courtesy reminders about unauthorized modifications. She left a brochure about visual uniformity in my mailbox. She even tried to recruit my next-door neighbor, Paul, who spends more time trimming his hedges than breathing, to politely discuss the matter. But when she realized I wasn't biting, her tone shifted. One night she texted from the HOA group chat, "Some people think rules don't apply to them. That's not how Willow Creek works." The next morning, I found paint test swatches taped to my mailbox. She'd circled warm sand. That brings us to the moment she climbed my ladder. She must have snuck it from my garage sidewall. I recognized the tape residue where I'd labeled it. I was too stunned to stop her immediately. When I finally spoke, she announced like a preacher, "Your dish reflects light into my dining room window. It's a distraction during breakfast." I pointed out that her house faced west, and my dish was aimed south, but physics wasn't her strong suit. She insisted it was offensive. I told her touching someone else's property was a felony. She told me to file a complaint through proper channels. And then she left, paint flecks drying on her shoes. By noon, my signal was gone. Every channel, every site dead. I called the provider. They said the coding had blocked the signal completely. "We'll send a tech in 3 days, they said. 3 days. I work remotely managing software deployment. Without internet, I was useless. I drove to a cafe for a hotspot, only to find Karen already there, sipping an iced latte and telling another neighbor that eyesores have consequences. She smiled at me when I walked in. "Oh dear, I hope your Wi-Fi isn't acting up." That night, I started plotting. Revenge wasn't my first instinct, it was preservation. But when you deal with someone who wields bylaws like a weapon, strategy matters more than anger. I reread the HOA charter, particularly the clause about shared utility infrastructure. See, the HOA had recently switched the community's internet backbone to a central provider. Guess whose relay node sat right behind my property fence? If that hub went down, half the neighborhood, including Karen, would be offline. My dish wasn't connected to it, but I knew one thing about satellite interference. Paint can bounce signals in unpredictable ways. So, the next morning, I cleaned up. I moved the ladder back, washed off what paint I could, and casually mentioned to Karen as she pruned her petunias that I'd fixed the reflection problem. She smiled, smug as ever, and said, "Good. We'll see fewer complaints now." 2 hours later, her husband's Range Rover pulled up, and I heard her shouting from inside about the router not working. By evening, the HOA Facebook page lit up, Outage reported across Willow Creek. Every modem west of Birch Lane was dead. The relay node, it turned out, had been overheating all day because Karen's beige overspray, fine enough to coat surfaces, had drifted onto the receiver vent. I didn't have to lift a finger. Karma did it for me. The next day, technicians arrived in orange vests. They roped off the relay box and traced the cause to paint particulate obstruction. Karen came storming to my yard demanding to know if I'd tampered with it. I laughed. Karen, I'm still waiting for my own repair. Maybe it's contagious. She didn't appreciate the humor. She called an emergency HOA meeting on Zoom, which, ironically, none of them could access because the internet was still down. She resorted to a mass text that began with "effective immediately, all exterior equipment must be pre-approved," and ended with, "I expect cooperation." By day 3, the entire subdivision was restless. Teenagers couldn't game, retirees couldn't watch their morning shows, and every smart sprinkler system defaulted to manual mode. Someone spray-painted "Bring Back Wi-Fi" on the clubhouse wall. The techs finally restored service that evening, but not before local news caught wind of paint contamination in HOA communications hub. They aired a segment showing crews scrubbing beige streaks off the equipment. The reporter mentioned resident interference. Karen's Lexus was visible in the background, trunk open, with paint cans inside. When the story aired, I thought she'd retreat quietly. Instead, she doubled down. She accused me of planting evidence to frame her. She claimed the wind must have blown the paint from an unrelated art project. She demanded a new inspection of my property for unsanctioned devices. I stayed calm. I sent a polite email to the HOA legal contact with time-stamped photos of her on my ladder and the technician's report showing paint as the root cause. Then I copied the local station's journalist on the email. By the next morning, the HOA group chat was chaos. Neighbors who once worshipped her were now demanding her resignation. One even joked, she tried to paint over the internet. Through it all, I kept quiet. I went for my usual jogs, waved politely at the gawkers, and pretended I hadn't noticed Karen's curtains twitch every time I passed. The best revenge isn't loud, it's watching someone unravel under their own weight. But deep down, I knew this wasn't over. People like her don't admit defeat. They escalate. And as I'd soon learn, her next move would turn a petty paint job into a full-blown neighborhood war that dragged in code enforcement, a local news van, and, believe it or not, a federal communications investigator. But that's another story. 3 days after the paint fiasco, the HOA board gathered in Karen's backyard under a white canopy she'd rented specifically for the occasion. It was supposed to be an emergency community compliance summit, but it looked more like a suburban trial. 5 folding chairs formed a half-circle facing me across her manicured lawn, each occupied by a board member clutching a clipboard. Karen stood in the center, arms crossed, a smug glint in her eye that said she was certain this was the day she'd break me. Behind her, her husband Richard, quiet, uncomfortable, and perpetually sunburned, kept refilling lemonade glasses like a nervous waiter. The air was humid, the kind that makes everything feel sticky, and I remember thinking how ridiculous it was that I'd left an actual engineering meeting to defend my satellite dish to people who thought bandwidth was a landscaping term. Karen opened with a dramatic sigh. "We are here because one resident has chosen to flagrantly disregard community harmony," she began, her voice trembling with theatrical outrage. "Not only did he install unapproved equipment, but his actions have now caused damage to shared property." I raised a hand. "Karen, for the 100th time, the FCC." She snapped her fingers, interrupting me. "This isn't about legality. It's about aesthetics. Our neighborhood has a look. Beige tones, clean lines, cohesive symmetry. You can't just stick a space saucer on your roof like it's NASA." I bit back a laugh. "So harmony means everyone gets slow internet?" Her jaw tightened. "Harmony means rules. And rules exist to protect us from chaos." The others murmured in agreement, though most looked bored. I could tell some just wanted their Wi-Fi back. Mrs. Dempsey from the end of the cul-de-sac whispered, "Maybe we can table this until service is restored." But Karen ignored her. She had a printed packet titled, "Dishgate Evidence," which she waved like a holy document. Inside were photos of my yard, screenshots of the outage report, and, hilariously, a picture of my ladder, as if that proved something. I decided to play dumb. "You're saying my dish caused the outage?" "I'm saying your irresponsible defiance set off a chain reaction," she replied. "You put us all at risk. That's reckless." "Karen," I said slowly, "your paint was found on the relay box. You literally shut down the internet with your color palette." She smiled. "That's unverified hearsay. By the technicians. They're contractors," she shot back. "They say whatever gets them paid." I could have kept arguing, but I realized something. She wasn't trying to win the logic war. She was trying to perform dominance in front of her little audience. People like Karen don't need to be right. They just need to be obeyed. So I let her finish her speech about decorum and visual contamination, then calmly said, "Fine. If you think my dish violates anything, file an official notice. I'll respond through the proper channels." Her nostrils flared. "Don't think your smug tone impresses anyone, Mr. Engineer. Don't think your paintbrush makes you an architect," I said, standing up. There was a stunned silence before I turned and left, my coffee still warm in my hand. I didn't slam the gate behind me, but I made sure it clicked loud enough to echo. By evening, the fallout began. Karen posted a new HOA bulletin online titled Enforcement Update, Modern Technology and Neighborhood Character. It was 3 paragraphs of veiled threat. The last line read, "The board reserves the right to impose fines for any resident who fails to align with the established community aesthetic." Within hours, comments flooded the thread. Some neighbors sided with her, complaining about visual clutter. But more chimed in with complaints about her authoritarian behavior, especially after the news clip. Someone posted a meme of her face next to a broken router with the caption, "Signal lost. Due to excessive entitlement." She tried deleting it, but screenshots spread faster than her paint fumes. That night, a new twist emerged. Around 10 p.m., I heard voices outside. I peeked through my blinds and saw 2 people in reflective vests by the side fence, flashlights aimed toward the relay node. I stepped outside and called, "Everything okay?" One of them introduced himself as an investigator from the Federal Communications Commission. Apparently, the paint incident had triggered interference complaints from nearby residents, not just Wi-Fi outages, but actual signal disruption affecting the next subdivision over. The FCC had jurisdiction. I almost felt sorry for Karen. Almost. The investigator asked a few questions about what I'd seen, so I told him everything. The ladder, the paint cans, her statement about fixing my dish. He took notes, then politely asked for a copy of the photos I'd taken. The next day, they returned with environmental testers. By noon, they'd confirmed that the reflective coating she used contained metallic compounds that could scatter radio signals. That meant her neutral tone wasn't just illegal to apply on communications equipment, it violated federal broadcasting regulations. When Karen saw them scanning her backyard for evidence, she came storming out in a sun hat and glove. "This is harassment," she yelled. "You can't investigate me without notice." One of the officers, unfazed, replied, "Ma'am, we're investigating interference reported by multiple residents. Your cooperation is required." I watched from my porch, sipping coffee again, the irony not lost on me. She glared at me across the hedge. "You did this." "Actually," I said, "you did this with primer." Later that afternoon, I got an email from the HOA legal liaison asking for a courtesy statement. Apparently, Karen was accusing me of sabotaging the relay box to frame her. The attached photos she submitted showed beige smears, but the timestamp metadata showed they'd been taken after the FCC visit. She'd gone back and tried to repaint the box to make it look like old damage. Classic cover-up attempt. I sent the liaison my original timestamps, the FCC's documentation request, and Karen's public Facebook rant from earlier where she'd written, "All I did was touch up some ugly equipment. People overreact." That alone was damning. By Friday, word had spread beyond the neighborhood. The local station followed up their first story with a sequel. HOA president under investigation after paint interference causes outage. They replayed clips of frustrated residents, including Paul, the hedge guy, complaining on camera. "We pay dues for stability, not dictatorship," he said. I nearly choked laughing when I heard it. Karen went silent for 24 hours. No emails, no posts, no clipboard patrols. But Saturday morning, a truck rolled up to her house, a professional power washer. She was having her entire driveway, fence, and porch stripped for compliance, which was code for damage control. I could tell she thought cleaning up the mess would erase her guilt. Around noon, she approached me while I was trimming the lawn. For the first time in weeks, she wasn't wearing her sunglasses. Her tone was almost civil. "Look, I think things have gotten out of hand," she said. "Agreed," I replied, not stopping my mower. "Maybe we can resolve this quietly," she continued. "You withdraw your complaint, and I'll waive your violation fines." "I don't have any fines," I said. "Not yet," she muttered. I shut the mower off and looked at her. "Karen, this isn't a neighbor disagreement anymore. You brought federal investigators into a paint war. Maybe it's time you step down." Her face hardened instantly. "You think you can embarrass me into quitting? I built this HOA from nothing. You built a fiefdom. There's a difference." She turned and stormed off, muttering something about ungrateful tech snobs. That evening, another email landed in my inbox, a new emergency fine notice. She'd fined me $500 for creating a hostile environment. I laughed out loud. It was so absurd it felt like parody. I forwarded it straight to the FCC officer who'd been in touch, along with the HOA's bylaw attachment that clearly stated no fines could be imposed during an active investigation. Sunday morning, I woke up to find a yellow envelope taped to my door. It wasn't from the HOA, it was from a law firm. Karen had hired counsel. The letter accused me of defamation, emotional distress, and interference with community governance. I almost admired her persistence. I called the firm, left a voicemail, and then forwarded the letter to my own lawyer. He called back an hour later laughing. "She doesn't have a case. She vandalized federally protected property. If she pushes, we countersue." For the next 2 days, the neighborhood became a soap opera. Half the residents took my side. The rest either hid or nervously avoided eye contact. The HOA board announced a temporary suspension of duties for Karen, pending external review. She called it a vacation. Meanwhile, the FCC finished their report confirming her paint caused electromagnetic interference. It wasn't just negligence. It was a violation with potential fines of up to $15,000. When the official letter arrived, she tried to spin it as a misunderstanding. But the board had seen enough. By Wednesday evening, she was forced to step down voluntarily. Her final act as president was a goodbye post that began with, "I only ever wanted this community to shine." I almost replied, "It sure did, after you painted it metallic." But I didn't. I saved it for later. Because even though she'd lost the title, Karen wasn't done fighting. Losing control doesn't humble people like her, it makes them dangerous. And her next move would make everything before look like a warm-up act. For a week, peace returned to Willow Creek. Well, as much peace as you can have in a neighborhood where people still whispered, "Paint Lady," when walking their dogs. Karen had gone dark. Her once daily HOA emails vanished. The Facebook group was quiet except for memes mocking her beige obsession. Kids were back to gaming, retirees had their talk shows, and for the first time in months, my inbox wasn't filled with HOA nonsense. I started to think it might finally be over. Then, on the 8th day, a new email hit my inbox at 6:32 a.m. Subject line: Notice of non-compliance, communication equipment reassessment. It was from Acting HOA President, Richard Blackwell, Karen's husband. The email was polite, almost apologetic at first, thanking residents for their patience during a transitionary period. Then it took a hard left turn into bureaucracy. It declared that the HOA would be conducting an inspection of all exterior communication devices to ensure visual cohesion and electromagnetic safety. The inspections were mandatory, and failure to comply could result in escalated dues or restricted amenities. Translation: Karen had found her loophole. I nearly spit my coffee across the counter. The gall of using her husband as a proxy was both desperate and, in a weird way, impressive. She couldn't legally touch my property anymore, but she could weaponize policy through him. I replied simply, "Per FCC guidelines, your HOA has no jurisdiction over privately owned communication equipment. Any inspection attempt will be trespassing." 5 minutes later, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I answered. "Good morning, this is Richard," came the uneasy voice on the other end. "Karen asked me to follow up." "Richard," I said, "I think you've had a rough month. Maybe sit this one out." "Listen, she's trying to make it right," he said quickly. "She wants to issue a refund for the fines and end this. But you have to stop sending her messages to the FCC." "I haven't sent her anything since last week," I replied. "Maybe she's imagining it." A pause. Then he sighed, defeated. "Yeah. She's been a bit stressed." "Richard," I said gently, "that's one word for it." When I hung up, I thought that might be the end of it. But Karen's stress had a way of spreading. That evening, I noticed a white SUV parked at the corner near my house. No plates, just a magnet logo that said Community Compliance Inspection Unit. I thought it was a joke, until 2 men in polos got out, clipboards in hand, and started taking photos of my front yard. I walked out calmly. "Can I help you?" One of them introduced himself as Mr. Adams, Community Standards Enforcement. I asked for ID. They produced laminated cards that looked like they'd been printed at Office Depot. When I pointed that out, they said they were subcontracted by the HOA. I said, "You're standing on private property." They claimed it was a public sidewalk. So I did what any sane person would do. I took my phone out and recorded the whole interaction. When I mentioned that the FCC had an ongoing file on unauthorized interference investigations, their tone changed fast. They left within minutes, muttering about miscommunication. 2 hours later, Richard called again, panicked. She hired them off Craigslist, he confessed. She said the HOA needed to restore order while the board was in flux. "Please don't call the cops." "Richard," I said, "she's impersonating inspectors." "I know," he whispered. "I think she's losing it." That night, something strange happened. Around 1 a.m., I was half asleep when a sharp clank echoed outside. I got up, looked out the window, and saw a figure crouched by my fence, flashlight flickering. I turned on my porch light. The person froze, then bolted down the street, gray hoodie, small frame, definitely not a burglar. Next morning, I checked my dish. Someone had unscrewed the base bolts halfway, enough to loosen its alignment. There were muddy footprints under the ladder slot where my old one used to sit. I knew instantly who it was. I didn't call the police yet, I wanted proof. So I installed a motion camera facing the dish, hidden beneath the eaves of the roof. Then I waited. The footage came quicker than I expected. 2 nights later, 12:43 a.m., the camera caught her. Karen herself, sneaking into my yard with a flashlight and wearing a hoodie like a burglar in a bad sitcom. She crouched beside the dish, holding what looked like a wrench, and started fiddling with it. Halfway through, she looked up toward my window, startled by something, a car passing by, maybe, and ran off again. The next morning, I sent the clip to the HOA board, CC'd the local police department, and copied the FCC officer just for good measure. No commentary. Just the video. By lunchtime, the group chat exploded. Neighbors were furious. Even the die-hard Karen defenders had switched sides. Paul from next door wrote, "This is getting insane. She's trespassing now." Someone else added, "Is she trying to sabotage the internet again?" Then came the twist. That afternoon, a patrol car pulled up outside her house. 2 officers knocked on the door. Karen stepped out, all calm smiles, as if she'd been expecting them. She spoke with them for 10 minutes, gesturing dramatically toward my property, then they left without cuffing her. She waved at me across the lawn. I didn't wave back. An hour later, she posted in the HOA group, "Certain individuals are fabricating evidence to discredit me. Rest assured, the truth will come out." The post had 20 angry reactions before she deleted it. That night, I heard hammering sounds coming from her backyard. I peeked through the hedge and saw her building something, a tall wooden structure covered in tarp. It looked like a makeshift shed. The next morning, I walked by pretending to jog. When she saw me, she smiled too wide. "Just a little DIY project," she chirped. "You'll love it." Later, I found out what it was: her own satellite dish. Apparently, she'd decided if she couldn't stop me from having one, she'd install her own, painted beige, of course. The problem? She mounted it facing directly into a tree, completely blocking the signal. Within 2 days, she was back to square one: 0 reception, 0 patience. I overheard her screaming on the phone to the provider, "My neighbor's dish is stealing my bandwidth." I couldn't resist. I walked over holding a cup of coffee and said, "That's not how satellite signals work, Karen." She turned, eyes wild. "You think you're so clever, don't you? You and your little government friends." "Karen," I said evenly, "I think you're one HOA memo away from a restraining order." She pointed a finger at me. "You'll regret this." It was meant as a threat, but it came off like a tantrum. Still, it gave me a bad feeling. I double-checked my locks that night. 3 days passed quietly. Then, one morning, I woke up to a strange buzzing noise, like a generator. I looked outside and froze. Karen's new dish was now connected to a massive industrial amplifier. She'd literally rented a signal booster from a local electronics store and wired it to her setup. The thing was blasting power so high that it knocked out my reception again, along with half the block's garage openers. I walked over immediately. "Karen, you can't just amplify a satellite signal. That's illegal." She smirked. "Oh please. It's called innovation." I pointed at the amplifier. "That thing emits at regulated frequencies. You could fry every modem in a mile radius. Then maybe people will finally follow the rules," she said. I called the FCC contact again. Within 4 hours, a black SUV pulled up. The same investigator stepped out with a handheld meter. He scanned the air, frowned, and asked her to shut it off. She refused. "I know my rights," she snapped. "You people don't scare me." He showed her his badge. "Ma'am, this device is unlicensed. You're interfering with public communications." Karen's face went pale. "It's decorative." He gestured to the flickering lights and humming cables. "Decorations don't emit electromagnetic radiation." That evening, they confiscated the amplifier and issued her an official warning. Her second federal offense in 2 weeks. The next day, her husband's SUV was gone, replaced by a moving truck. Word spread fast. Richard had left for his brother's place, saying he needed space. Karen stood on her porch, arms crossed, glaring at anyone who dared look her way. I thought that was the endgame, that she'd finally fold under the weight of her own insanity. But the following morning, I found something new on my doorstep. A letter, hand-delivered. No envelope, just folded paper with neat cursive handwriting. "Enjoy your signal while it lasts," it said. "You'll soon learn that control always returns to those who deserve it." No signature. But it didn't need one. That was the moment I realized Karen wasn't finished. She was regrouping. And whatever came next, it wasn't going to be about HOA bylaws anymore. It was going to be personal. I woke up the next morning to the sharp, metallic clatter of a ladder against my side fence, the kind of sound that snaps you out of sleep because your instincts know it shouldn't be there. I bolted up, heart pounding, and yanked open the curtains. For a split second, I thought it was happening again, that Karen was back to her midnight sabotage sessions, but instead, I saw two uniformed men in reflective vests and hard hats unloading equipment. The truck they'd arrived in bore the logo Willow Creek Infrastructure Division. Except, as far as I knew, our HOA didn't have any infrastructure division. I threw on a t-shirt and walked out barefoot into the driveway. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" I asked. One of them smiled politely but didn't meet my eyes. "Just here for a scheduled upgrade, sir. New signal synchronization unit for the community grid." "Community grid?" I repeated. "Never heard of it." "It's under directive from the HOA," he said. "All communications equipment must be synchronized for visual uniformity and data safety. It's in your bylaws." That last line was pure Karen language, word for word from her previous threats. "You got paperwork?" I asked. He handed me a crumpled sheet with an HOA letterhead, and I recognized the font immediately. Comic Sans. So, she was at it again, this time pretending to commission an upgrade to reinstall control over my equipment. I told the workers they were on private property and suggested they check with the actual HOA board before touching anything. They exchanged uneasy glances, packed their tools, and left without a fight. 10 minutes later, my phone rang. "Did you just threaten a contractor?" Karen's voice was sharp enough to cut glass. "Good morning to you too," I said. "I didn't threaten anyone. I told them to leave. They were performing a community compliance operation." "Karen," I said calmly, "if you're going to invent fake departments, at least use a font that isn't Comic Sans." "You think this is funny?" she hissed. "You've humiliated me, my husband left, and now the HOA is a laughingstock. Do you have any idea what it's like being mocked by your own neighbors?" "Yes," I said, "actually I do. You started it." She hung up. By noon, another email appeared in my inbox. Mandatory dish removal notice. It was unsigned, but the sender address was admin@willowcreek-harmony.org. The website didn't exist, and the email headers traced back to a generic Gmail account under the name Neighborhood Admin 14. The 14 made me laugh. Karen always numbered her accounts. She wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. I forwarded the email to the HOA's temporary president, Mrs. Dempsey, along with a short message. "You might want to handle your rogue ex-president before she starts issuing drone strikes." Dempsey called me immediately, frazzled. "Oh dear, we thought she'd settled down. She showed up at the clubhouse last night, said she was helping with the Signal Unification Initiative. I assumed she was just volunteering. Mrs. Dempsey, she's impersonating officials." I'll talk to her," she stammered. But talking wasn't going to solve it. Karen had gone from entitled to unhinged. That evening, I drove past her house. The beige paint had started peeling off her fence, revealing dark streaks underneath. Her front yard, once immaculate, was now littered with cardboard boxes, extension cords, and what looked like dismantled electronics. She was in the driveway assembling something that resembled a small satellite array, muttering to herself. The glow of a laptop screen flickered on her porch table beside open FCC manuals. The next day, the first strange interference started. My TV froze mid-broadcast, the radio buzzed with static, and my wireless doorbell rang repeatedly even though no one was there. I unplugged it, but the ringing continued faintly through the speaker, like an electronic ghost. My Wi-Fi speed dropped to a crawl, and every other device started randomly disconnecting. Then came the neighborhood text. "Anyone else's garage door going crazy? My Alexa keeps saying signal lost." Wi-Fi flickering again. Is she doing it? By sunset, it was clear the interference was radiating from somewhere close. I grabbed my handheld signal meter, a perk of my engineering job, and walked outside. The needle spiked toward one direction, Karen's yard. I followed the readings, and there it was, her new project, humming loudly under a plastic tarp. I walked up to her property line and called out, "Karen, what are you doing?" She looked up, hair frazzled, eyes wild with exhaustion. "I'm taking control of the signal grid. You ruined my reputation, but I'll fix the network myself." "Karen," I said, "you're not fixing anything. You're broadcasting interference." "It's not interference," she said sharply. "It's equilibrium. I'm balancing the frequencies so everyone gets equal bandwidth." "That's not how frequencies work." She smiled. "You'll thank me later." I stepped back, realizing I wasn't talking to the same woman who'd argued about beige paint. This was someone unraveling. The following morning, code enforcement showed up, probably tipped off by one of the neighbors. Karen refused to let them onto her property. From my porch, I could hear her yelling about scientific sovereignty and signal tyranny. When they threatened to bring a warrant, she shouted, "Do it! I'll file an injunction under the Telecommunications Fairness Act," which, for the record, does not exist. 2 hours later, she live-streamed herself on Facebook ranting about government conspiracies in HOA satellites. The comments section was pure chaos. Some locals mocked her, others egged her on, and one person from another neighborhood actually asked for DIY network tips. That night, I got an unexpected knock on my door. It was Officer Marks, the same deputy who'd handled my noise complaint months earlier when Karen's son had thrown a loud graduation party. "Evening," he said. "Got another situation with your favorite neighbor." "What's she done this time?" He looked tired. "She filed a police report. Says you're spying on her communications and redirecting her frequency traffic." I nearly laughed. "Redirecting her traffic? What does that even mean?" "Beats me," he said, scratching his neck. "We had to take it down as a false complaint. But maybe tone things down for a while." "Tone things down? I haven't done anything." He nodded. "Yeah, I know. But sometimes it's safer to let people like her burn themselves out." Except she wasn't burning out, she was escalating. 2 nights later, my motion camera caught her again. This time, she wasn't near the dish. She was near my garage, holding what looked like a small spray can. I ran outside before she could finish whatever she was doing. She froze mid-step, can in hand. "Step away from my property, Karen." "I'm marking the interference zone," she said defensively. "This area's contaminated by your illegal frequency range." "It's a garage," I said. "Not Area 51. She sprayed one last line of fluorescent orange paint on my driveway and stormed off muttering about evidence. The next morning, I found half the neighborhood had orange streaks near their fences, each labeled with crude numbers, probably her data points. It was like a crime scene painted by a lunatic scientist. I called Mrs. Dempsey again. "You need to handle this before someone gets hurt." She sighed. "We've tried. The board voted to revoke her membership, but she refuses to acknowledge it. She says she is the HOA. She can't just." "She changed the locks on the clubhouse," Dempsey said. "We had to call a locksmith." That was the moment I realized we'd crossed from petty HOA nonsense into full-blown delusion. Karen had lost everything, her authority, her marriage, her credibility, and now she was clawing for control through chaos. By the end of the week, the interference had become so severe that residents couldn't use garage openers, key fobs, or even some pacemakers without glitching. The local utility company dispatched technicians to locate the source. They pinpointed it within minutes: Karen's backyard transmitter array. When they confronted her, she screamed about frequency freedom and data colonization. When they tried to shut it down, she grabbed a hose and sprayed them with water. One of them slipped, fell, and broke an ankle. That was it. The cops were called, and this time they didn't just talk. They arrested her for obstruction and reckless endangerment. The whole neighborhood gathered silently as they led her away. Even then, she was shouting, You can't silence the signal. You'll all see. The irony was thick. She'd started by painting over a dish to make things look uniform, and ended by trying to control the very airwaves that kept everyone connected. As the police car drove off, Mrs. Dempsey approached me, shaking her head. I can't believe it came to this. I looked at the relay box at the corner. The same one she'd painted weeks ago, now scraped clean and gleaming silver again. Karen needed control, I said quietly. She didn't care what it cost. We thought it was over then. But 2 days later, when the FCC technicians returned to dismantle her illegal transmitter, they found something hidden underneath the tarp. A small, battery-powered repeater still humming faintly. It had been rigged to activate remotely. She might have been in custody, but her signal wasn't entirely gone. 2 days after Karen's arrest, the neighborhood felt like it had exhaled for the first time in months. Kids played basketball again in cul-de-sacs that had been ghost towns, sprinklers hissed over freshly mowed lawns, and for the first time since the paint wars, nobody was arguing about HOA bylaws on Facebook. Everyone assumed the chaos had ended. But as I learned long ago, peace in Willow Creek was always the eye of the storm, not the calm after it. It started on a Thursday morning around 3:17 a.m. I woke to the faint hum of electronics, an oddly rhythmic pulse like a router repeatedly booting up. At first, I thought I was dreaming, but the blue glow leaking through the blinds said otherwise. I got out of bed, looked toward my window, and froze. My satellite dish was flickering. Not just reflecting light, actually flickering. The receiver lights were flashing on and off in rapid bursts, like it was trying to connect to something that didn't exist. I walked outside, still half asleep, and noticed something else. Every porch light on my side of the street was strobing the same way, flicker, pause, flicker. The entire block looked like it was trapped inside a low-budget alien invasion movie. I checked my phone. No service. No Wi-Fi. My smart lock app was frozen. By the time dawn came, the neighborhood was buzzing, literally and figuratively. Someone's sprinkler system had turned itself on in the middle of the night and flooded their garden. Another neighbor's garage door had cycled open and shut until the motor burned out. It was like every smart device had staged a revolt. Then came the kicker. Around 8 a.m., I got a call from the FCC investigator, Miller. The same guy who'd handled the first case. "Mr. Evans," he said, "did you notice any unusual electronic activity last night?" "Define unusual," I replied. He sighed. "We're tracking a reactivated signal source in your area. Same interference pattern as the one from your neighbor's transmitter." My stomach dropped. "You're telling me Karen's signal is back? Or someone's recreated it," he said. "We're not ruling anything out." I looked toward her house. The police tape still fluttered across her gate. The windows were dark, the driveway empty. "She's in custody," I said. "That's what makes it strange," Miller replied. "The new pattern's broadcasting from multiple points." "Multiple?" "Yeah. Like someone duplicated her setup." He said they'd be sending another team, but it might take a day. Meanwhile, I decided to run my own scan. I grabbed my handheld frequency meter again, and sure enough, the readings were bouncing off the chart. The source wasn't just Karen's backyard, it was coming from 3 spots: her place, the clubhouse, and, somehow, my fence line. I followed the beeps until I reached the back corner of my yard. There, half buried under mulch, was a small, rectangular device blinking faintly red. Someone had planted a miniature repeater, one of the same kind Karen had used before. It had been wrapped in plastic and taped to a piece of rebar, hidden beneath my rose bushes. I called the police, but when the officer arrived, he didn't look surprised. "You're the satellite guy, right?" he asked. "We've had 3 calls this morning, same kind of gadget found in other yards." "So she planted them before the arrest?" I asked. He nodded. "Looks that way. Kind of impressive, honestly. She must have set them up to reactivate remotely." That word, remotely, hit me. The FCC crew came back later that afternoon. They collected the repeater, sealed it in an evidence bag, and ran a sweep across the whole block. They found 2 more devices, one in Paul's Hedge, one near the community garden. Both were programmed to rebroadcast her old frequency pattern on a timer. It was her revenge, her final message. By sunset, Miller called again. "We neutralized the signals," he said. "You should be good now." But the word "should" stuck in my head. Sure enough, 2 nights later, the lights started flickering again. Only this time, it wasn't just my block. The entire subdivision glowed in rhythmic pulses, like a silent Morse code. From my porch, I could see the reflections on distant rooftop. Someone screamed, "The power's out!" Another yelled about their car alarm going off. I checked the meter again, and this time, the readings weren't coming from the repeaters. They were coming from above. I stepped into the driveway, looked up, and saw a faint glint of metal mounted under the streetlight near Karen's old property. I grabbed my flashlight, craned my neck, and there it was. Another repeater, smaller than before, zip-tied to the lamp's support arm. She must have planted it weeks ago, disguised as maintenance equipment. By morning, the HOA group chat was pandemonium. Who keeps turning our power on and off? Is this a cyber attack? This is what happens when you let engineers live here. I didn't even bother replying. Then, around noon, a new post appeared under an anonymous profile named Harmony Watcher. Maybe next time you'll think twice before humiliating people. Control is balance. Balance returns. It didn't take a detective to guess who it was. Karen was somehow online, either from jail or through a friend, and taunting the neighborhood. The post included a blurry photo of the relay box she'd vandalized months ago, now with the caption, "Still ugly. Still out of balance." That's when I decided to end it. I spent that night combing through the FCC case logs and realized something. Karen's interference signature wasn't random, it had a distinct frequency pulse that could be traced. I configured my receiver to triangulate the exact source using directional analysis. The pattern led not to her house this time, but to the clubhouse attic. The next morning, I drove there under the pretense of checking on my mailbox. Mrs. Dempsey was outside watering her flowers. I asked casually if anyone had been using the clubhouse since Karen's arrest. She said no, though she'd noticed the lights flickering there at night. Inside, the air smelled of old carpet and chlorine from the nearby pool. I climbed the maintenance stairs to the attic and found it, another homemade transmitter, wired to the building's main circuit. This one was bigger than the others, with a note taped to it. Sometimes leadership requires persistence. It was signed with a smiley face. I took a picture, called the FCC again, and waited. By the time the agents arrived, the device was pulsing louder, literally humming. One of the techs disconnected it, and the humming stopped instantly. When they opened it, they found a SIM card attached to a microcontroller, meaning someone could activate it remotely via text message. That meant Karen wasn't working alone. Over the next week, investigators traced the messages back to a prepaid phone purchased 2 towns over. Surveillance footage showed a woman in a beige hoodie buying it. Even blurry, there was no mistaking that hair, silver blonde, tightly curled. Karen had been released on bail. Apparently, she'd been out for 4 days, and no one in the neighborhood knew. She'd immediately resumed her signal project, convinced the community was spiritually unbalanced without her leadership. By the time they caught her again, she was parked outside the clubhouse at midnight, laptop open, sending the activation command for the transmitter. When police surrounded her car, she was calm, eerily calm. She told them she'd been restoring harmony, and that the grid needed cleansing. She went quietly this time. No shouting, no theatric. Just a faint smile as she looked around at the crowd of neighbors who'd gathered to watch. But the real twist came later that week. After the devices were dismantled and the system fully cleared, Miller called me with one last update. "We did a full diagnostic on the repeater network," he said. "And we found something odd." "What now?" I asked. The devices weren't just broadcasting interference. They were transmitting data, encrypted logs. What kind of data? He hesitated. Home device signals. Security cameras, smart locks, thermostat. It looks like she was harvesting them. I went cold. You mean she was spying on us? Collecting, he said carefully. We don't know if she accessed the feeds, but she was gathering metadata. Karen hadn't just wanted control of the neighborhood's appearance. She'd wanted control of its information. That night, I walked the perimeter of my house, disconnected every smart device I owned, and sat in silence with the hum of the air conditioner filling the room. Outside, the streetlights glowed steady again, no flicker, no interference. But I couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere, behind some screen, she was still watching. 3 days later, a moving van arrived at her house. Not to bring her back. Her property had been foreclosed by the bank. Workers carried out boxes labeled HOA records, paint supplies, and, disturbingly, equipment. I stood at my porch, watching them load everything into the truck. Mrs. Dempsey joined me, sighing. I can't believe how far she went, she said. Power does strange things to people, I replied. She nodded. What'll you do now? I looked up at my dish, freshly cleaned, signal strong, steady green. Keep my antenna up, I said. Just in case she tries to broadcast from Mars next time. We both laughed, but underneath, I wasn't joking. Because in Willow Creek, peace never lasted long, and people like Karen never truly went quiet. They just waited for a stronger signal. For a while, it really did feel like the nightmare had ended. Karen's house sat dark and silent, the grass growing tall around the "for sale" bank-owned sign staked in the front yard. The HOA, finally under new management, had become strangely polite. Emails now opened with things like, "Hope you're having a pleasant week," instead of "urgent violation notice." The jokes about Signal Karen faded, replaced by cautious optimism that maybe, just maybe, the neighborhood could heal. But a month later, the first whisper of her return came from an unlikely source, the real estate agent showing her foreclosed property. His name was Brent, a young guy with too much gel in his hair and not enough sense to recognize a curse when he saw one. He knocked on my door one morning holding a clipboard and a forced smile. "Hey neighbor," he said cheerfully. "Quick question, did the previous owner leave anything unusual behind? The staging crew says the basement doors welded shut." "Welded?" I repeated. "No, that's new." He laughed nervously. "Yeah, I thought so. The weird part? There's humming coming from inside. Like electrical humming. You wouldn't happen to know anything about that, would you?" I didn't. But the second he said humming, my stomach turned. I followed him over. The house looked even more depressing up close. Wilted hydrangeas, chipped shutters, paint buckets scattered near the porch step. Inside, it smelled faintly of ozone and mildew. Everything was stripped except for one thing, the basement door. Sure enough, the seams were sealed with metallic weld lines. Brent had been right, there was a faint, mechanical hum pulsing from behind it. "Probably an old sump pump," he said, clearly trying to convince himself. "Bank'll deal with it." But I knew better. That night, I emailed Miller from the FCC again. He didn't respond right away, which was unusual. The next day, I got a terse reply: "We'll send a technician. Do not attempt to open the basement." When the techs arrived 2 days later, they used a thermal camera on the door. Their faces said everything before the words did. "There's equipment running down there," one muttered. They cut the welds, and as the door creaked open, the smell hit us first: burnt plastic and singed wiring. Inside, the basement was a maze of wires, batteries, and homemade transmitters. Dozens of them. On the far wall, a large monitor glowed with a single message looping in white text on black background: "Harmony requires order." It was signed, of course, with a smiley face. One tech cursed under his breath. She built a fail-safe grid. Apparently, before her arrest, Karen had wired a secondary network beneath her house, a low-power backup array designed to restart her signal system remotely. The hum Brent had heard was the emergency battery keeping it alive. Over time, it had automatically synced to nearby smart devices, slowly rebuilding her old interference pattern without anyone realizing. I asked the techs if it was dangerous. They said no, not directly. But if someone reconnected it to the relay box, it could reactivate the entire network. I thought that was the end of it once they dismantled the equipment. But that night, I started getting strange notifications on my phone. Unknown device connected. Harmony Hub _14. Unknown network detected. Reborn. Unrecognized Bluetooth pairing request. At first, I thought it was a glitch. Then I realized the name, 14. Karen's old number. I reset every password, factory reset my router, even swapped my phone's SIM card. But the notifications kept coming back, like digital ghosts refusing to leave. 2 days later, Brent came by again, this time pale and sweating. Hey, just wondering, did you notice any weird noises last night? What kind of noises? He swallowed. Voices. Like recordings. Coming from the basement vent. We cut the power, but it's still happening. I followed him over once more. The house was supposed to be cleared out, yet the lights in the basement flickered faintly. When we went down, the monitors were gone, but the speakers built into the walls had activated. A distorted, looping voice echoed. Balance will be restored. Brent backed up fast. I'm out. I'm not showing this place again. He left, slammed the door, and didn't come back. The FCC returned the next morning and confirmed what I suspected. One of Karen's transmitters had reconnected wirelessly to a nearby power source. Somehow, even dismantled, her network was still trying to rebuild itself. They traced the signal origin to a server ping, one bouncing through a virtual private network registered under a fake name. When Miller showed me the name, I felt a chill. Vivian Blackwater. That was Karen's maiden name. Turns out she'd created a cloud backup of her entire Harmony project. Every line of code, every frequency signature, every broadcast log. Uploaded before her arrest. Her devices weren't random. They were configured to sync automatically to the cloud whenever they detected power. It was genius in the most horrifying way. And because the data was encrypted, the FCC couldn't shut it down immediately. Within a week, strange things started happening again. The HOA's internal email system crashed. The clubhouse Wi-Fi started redirecting everyone to a page titled Balance Portal. It displayed nothing but a beige background and the words, Join the order. Restore harmony. Neighbors panicked. Some unplugged their routers entirely. Paul from next door, once the guy obsessed with hedge symmetry, called me at 2 a.m. whispering, My Alexa just said, Welcome back, Karen. I didn't even say anything. The next day, the HOA board held an emergency meeting at the clubhouse. In person, no internet, no electronics. Mrs. Dempsey looked exhausted. She's haunting us through Wi-Fi, someone muttered. Another neighbor proposed tearing out every router in the neighborhood. Someone else suggested moving. Then the impossible happened. During the meeting, the lights flickered and the smart thermostat on the wall beeped. The screen turned beige. The temperature setting changed on its own. Then a calm female voice spoke through the vents. Order restores harmony. People screamed. We killed the power immediately. The voice stopped. But every phone in the room buzzed with the same push notification. Balance has been restored. That was the final straw. The FCC brought in cybersecurity experts. They isolated the network entirely from public access, quarantined the affected routers, and scrubbed the servers. They said it was over. This time for real. But as they left, one of the agents muttered something that stuck with me. You can't kill code that's self-replicating. Weeks passed. The neighborhood slowly stabilized. The HOA replaced all smart infrastructure with analog systems. No more app-controlled sprinklers or keyless lock. Everyone became paranoid about Wi-Fi. Mrs. Dempsey even posted a handwritten memo titled, Digital Caution Policy, taped to every mailbox. I tried to move on too. Work got busy again, and the memory of Karen began to fade into dark humor. Remember when our HOA president tried to start a frequency cult? Someone would joke at the barbecue, and we'd laugh, almost like it hadn't nearly broken us. But late one night, as I was reviewing code for a client, I noticed something strange. A test program I hadn't written had appeared in my project folder. Its title, Harmony_Sync_V2. I opened it. The file contained only one line of text. Signal found. Awaiting next transmission. I stared at it for a long time, unsure whether to be terrified or impressed. I deleted it immediately, wiped the system, reset everything again. But part of me knew it wouldn't matter. Because Karen wasn't just gone. She'd evolved. The next morning, Mrs. Dempsey came to my door holding a flyer. "You're not going to believe this," she said, handing it to me. It was a notice for a community tech workshop scheduled at the nearby Civic Center. The instructor's name? Viv Blackwell. I laughed at first. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe some poor woman just shared her name. But then I looked closer at the tagline printed beneath it, teaching neighborhoods how to maintain wireless harmony. That night, as I sat outside with my coffee, the faint hum returned, softer this time, almost soothing. My satellite dish blinked once, then steadied. Every light on my street flickered in perfect synchronization. And from the distance, somewhere near the clubhouse, came the faintest echo of a familiar phrase carried through the static of the night air. Order restores harmony. 2 weeks after the Viv Blackwell workshop flyer appeared, life in Willow Creek balanced on a wire between paranoia and denial. Some neighbors swore it was a coincidence. Others unplugged everything electronic and joked about going pre-Wi-Fi Amish. As for me, I oscillated between amusement and unease. I'd survived paint wars, fake inspectors, and an electromagnetic cult. Surely a motivational seminar couldn't top that. Still, I couldn't shake the sense that the story wasn't finished. People like Karen didn't fade quietly. They rebranded. The Civic Center event was scheduled for a Saturday afternoon. Curiosity finally beat caution, so I went, partly because I wanted proof, partly because I was tired of being afraid of beige flyers. When I walked into the hall, it looked disarmingly normal. Folding chairs, a projector screen, complimentary coffee. About 40 residents from nearby neighborhoods milled around. On stage stood a woman with platinum hair tied back neatly, a beige blazer, and that unmistakable air of authority I'd recognize anywhere. She introduced herself with a smile that froze my blood. "Hello, everyone. I'm Vivian Blackwell, founder of the Harmony Initiative." She dropped the Karen, shaved 10 years off her name, and was apparently now a consultant for community-based signal optimization. The audacity almost made me laugh. Almost. "Tonight," she said, "we'll learn how to create balance between technology and environment. When the frequencies in our homes are aligned, communities thrive." Her voice was calm, deliberate, hypnotic. Behind her, the projector displayed slides of geometric patterns, circles and lines pulsing faintly in rhythmic light. She wasn't just talking about routers anymore. She was preaching. I took a seat near the back, phone recording in my pocket. Around me, the audience nodded politely as she spoke about signal integrity and neighborly resonance. Then came the twist. She unveiled a small beige device, sleek and palm-sized. "This," she announced, "is a Harmony node. It stabilizes household bandwidth and reduces electromagnetic pollution. Every participant will receive one." My chest tightened. I'd seen that casing before, identical to the mini repeaters she'd buried around the neighborhood. Only now it was branded, repackaged, and legal-looking. During the Q&A, someone asked, "Will this work with satellite systems?" She smiled directly at me. "Oh yes. Especially satellite users. They often experience interference." Every eye turned toward me. I raised a hand. "Does the FCC know about this product?" She kept smiling. "I consulted with them, of course. Funny, I said, because I work with the agent who shut down your last initiative. He didn't mention any partnership. A flicker crossed her expression, brief but unmistakable. Then she composed herself. I think you're mistaken. I'm just helping communities reconnect. You mean recontrol, I said. Gasps rippled through the room. 2 volunteers approached me, trying to usher me out. Sir, let's not cause a scene, one murmured. I stood. You might want to check those little beige boxes before you plug them in. They transmit data, not peace. Karen's calm cracked. Leave, she snapped. You've done enough damage. I walked out under the weight of dozens of confused stares. Outside, I immediately called Miller. He answered on the first ring. She's back, I said. Civic Center, calling herself Vivian Blackwell. Selling transmitters. Already on our radar, he replied. We've been tracking shipments of her devices for weeks. You just confirmed the distribution point. Don't go back inside. Minutes later, 2 unmarked vans pulled into the parking lot. Agents in plain clothes entered quietly while the rest of us waited outside, pretending nothing unusual was happening. Through the glass doors, I saw them speak to her. She smiled, shook her head, gestured to her slides like she was giving a TED Talk. Then she saw me through the window. Her eyes locked on mine, calm but blazing. She mouthed one word, Harmony. They escorted her out 10 minutes later, not in handcuffs this time, but with firm hands on her elbows. She looked serene, almost triumphant, as if she'd expected this outcome. The audience murmured in confusion. One man asked, Is she in trouble? Another whispered, Was this a scam? The agents loaded boxes of her devices into the vans. One paused to tell me, She's still under a conditional release. Selling unlicensed transmitters violates that. Will she be charged again? I asked. He shrugged. Probably. But she's clever. Most of what she's doing skirts the line between illegal and delusional. That night, the news cycle lit up. Former HOA president accused of unauthorized tech sales. The footage showed her smiling as cameras flashed. Reporters called her eccentric, innovative, even misunderstood. Somehow, she'd spun the narrative again, painting herself as a crusader for digital wellness. The following week, a reporter came to my door asking for comment. I declined, but the next morning, my quote still appeared online. She's dangerous, not misunderstood. The backlash was immediate. Her followers, yes, she had followers now, flooded my inbox. Messages ranged from pitying to threatening. You just fear what you can't control. She's restoring balance, you're spreading chaos. Watch your frequencies. Miller advised me to ignore them, but I changed my number anyway. For a brief window, things seemed to quiet again. The Civic Center canceled future workshops, the HOA banned third-party tech programs, and Karen, or Vivian, or whatever she was calling herself, vanished from public view. Then, about 3 weeks later, the signal returned. This time, it wasn't interference. It was communication. At 11:14 p.m., my television turned on by itself. The screen stayed black for a few seconds, then displayed a line of white text. You took Harmony from me. My phone lit up at the same moment, unknown caller. Against my better judgment, I answered. Static filled the line, then her voice emerged, faint but unmistakable. You can destroy devices, she said, but not ideas. Karen, you need help, I replied. She laughed softly. You're right. I needed it years ago. Now I just need followers. Then the line went dead. I reported it to Miller, who confirmed she'd skipped a scheduled court appearance. Her tracking bracelet had gone offline. She's off the grid, he said grimly. If she's contacting you, she's close. The next few nights were quiet. Too quiet. I barely slept. Every hum from the refrigerator, every flicker of a streetlight, made my pulse spike. I started noticing beige cars driving slowly through the neighborhood, different models, same color. Maybe coincidence, maybe not. Then one evening, while bringing out the trash, I saw a small parcel sitting on my doorstep. No return label, just my name written in careful cursive. I didn't touch it. I called the police. When they arrived, they scanned it and found it harmless. Just a harmony node, the same kind from the workshop, with a handwritten note taped to it. A gift for my favorite resistor. The cops bagged it as evidence. One of them, a younger officer, asked, "You really think she's watching you?" "I don't think," I said. "I know." After that, I installed analog locks, cameras on independent circuits, and disconnected every wireless system in the house. My once smart home was now proudly dumb. I even rigged an old CB radio as a makeshift detector. If I ever heard static again, I'd know she was near. Weeks passed. The neighborhood learned to live cautiously. We joked about going anti-Wi-Fi, but no one laughed easily. The HOA removed all smart meters, every digital lock, every cloud-linked camera. Willow Creek became a paradox, a modern community stuck in analog purgatory. Then, one final twist. A letter arrived from the county. It said the bank had sold Karen's foreclosed property to a new buyer, a tech entrepreneur from another state. He planned to modernize the community with sustainable smart infrastructure. The name on the document stopped my heart cold. Listed under the LLC ownership, Harmony Systems Incorporated. I called Miller immediately. He didn't answer. I called again, voicemail. The next morning, I finally got through to his assistant, who said he'd been reassigned out of state. The FCC case, she explained, had been closed due to lack of ongoing threat. Lack of threat. That evening, new construction crews rolled into Karen's old property. They wore neutral uniforms, no logos, no company names, just gray trucks and quiet efficiency. They began installing new smart meters along the fences, running fiber cables, setting up antenna poles. I approached one and asked, "Who authorized this?" He smiled blandly. "Harmony Systems, ma'am. Just improving connectivity." My blood ran cold. "You mean Karen?" He blinked. "Sorry? Who?" They worked through the night. By morning, sleek new panels glinted where the old beige house once stood. The HOA sent a cheerful email announcing the return of community broadband. That night, when I turned on the TV, the signal was flawless, too flawless. High definition, no delay, perfect synchronization. Every light in the neighborhood pulsed once in unison, like a heartbeat. Then my phone buzzed. One new notification from an app one didn't remember installing. Harmony connected. Welcome home. The logo was beige. The smiley face, her signature. I stared at the screen as the message faded, replaced by a single line that felt less like a threat and more like a promise. Balance achieved. Transmission continuous. Outside, the wind was still, the air heavy. From somewhere deep in the neighborhood, almost too faint to hear, came a familiar hum, steady, rhythmic, eternal. Karen had finally restored harmony.